Hey, how are you doing, everybody, and welcome into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and in this episode, I'll be talking my top 12 Dynasty quarterback rankings here, so a broad, long-term perspective view on how I see this position being valued for our Dynasty leagues. I haven't made one of these episodes in a very long time, so I am excited to dive into things. Let's not waste any time, and let's get started. All right, as always, if you're new around here, make sure to drop down, click that subscribe button to join the SFS community and help support the channel here. Also, give this video a thumbs up so that others out there can find the SFS channel and ultimately join the community as well and have an interactive off season here, as we'll be talking Dynasty Fantasy Football, the NFL Draft, and all kinds of great stuff. If you want to get an extra step closer to interacting with myself, you can check out the SFS Community Discord server. The invite link to that is in the description of today's episode. And in that server, you can talk with other members of the SFS community, ask questions to me, and get some answers regarding your Dynasty leagues and anything you've got going on this fantasy football platform. So Josh Allen's the first quarterback I have in my rankings for today. He is my Dynasty QB1 heading into next season. He will just be 26 years old. I love it. I think there's still improvement that can be made from here. But what we have right now in Josh Allen, both as an NFL prospect and as a Dynasty fantasy football player, is an absolute beast, and the ceiling is sky high based off of what we've seen from him so far. If you need to be sold on Josh Allen to this point, I don't know what to tell you. Go back and watch the footage from Kansas City. That game, he did everything possible that this team needed him to do to win, whether it was running the football, scrambling, and escaping pressure in the pocket, making throws downfield. Josh Allen is a do-it-all quarterback, and on top of being an elite arm talent, being someone that has an absolute bazooka arm, I'm not sure if it's still an X-Factor trait in Madden, but essentially, if you're familiar with that, you can just take the quarterback with bazooka arm and throw the football 85 yards downfield. That is what Josh Allen is literally in real life. Josh Allen has an absolute cannon, and again, he's mobile. He's someone that can be used as a rushing threat, and that's for me why he's over a Patrick Mahomes, who you're going to see here in just a quick second. But Josh Allen's added ability on the ground, and it's not that Patrick Mahomes can't scramble. He actually is very effective at picking up yardage in the run game. But Josh Allen's ability to be used as a battering ram and to be able to score rushing touchdowns is very, very impressive. He's got 100 or more rushing attempts in each of his last 3 seasons. Again, this is coming from the quarterback position, so this is something that you don't take with a grain of salt. It's very valuable added on points to the situation that you get on top of, again, that elite arm talent now paired with a very, very good supporting cast, from Stephon Diggs to an up-and-comer in Gabriel Davis. Dawson Knox had a breakout this past season. And going back to that rushing point I made, he does have 6+ touchdowns every year on the ground. So that's something very, very impressive. He had 763 rushing yards in 2021. If you flash back and recall the Tampa Bay game, he had over 100 rushing yards in that performance, as he basically carries the load for this Bills team when they needed when they needed him to do so this season. He showed up in every way possible. He did the same for us in our fantasy leagues. Long-term, Josh Allen is the quarterback I'd want because of that huge frame, that Cam Newton-esque goal line rushing ability, just having such a mountain of a frame to try and tackle and bring to the ground, keep out of the end zone. It's too much to ask an NFL defense to do, so Josh Allen is my QB1. Patrick Mahomes is not very far behind. He is only 27 years of age, so we're talking Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. That slight year difference is basically insignificant to me. It's actually a little bit less than that, I believe, but obviously the marker, I think at some point during the year they're both the same age. But Patrick Mahomes, you get the arm talent, you get the arm angles, the no-look passes, all that great stuff that adds up, and obviously for fantasy football, that stuff is irrelevant, but what it does add up to is fantasy production, to elite passing yardage, to scoring a lot of touchdowns. Obviously, he has arguably the best coaching tandem from an offensive perspective when he has the minds of Eric Bieniemy and Coach Andy Reid coming together and scheming up this offense for Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, and all the other weapons they have on that football team. So you get a lot here with Patrick Mahomes as well. The small difference maker for me between Mahomes and Allen is that added rushing value in the red zone that cashes in for 6 points and scores touchdowns on Josh Allen's behalf in his situation. So Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, it's 1A, 1B. Both of these players are going to be fantastic fantasy assets for a long, long time. And you would be obviously delighted to have either of these players at the position. For me, this is where I think that things start to get a little bit more interesting. Justin Herbert is my QB3 here. We don't exactly know what Justin Herbert's ceiling is at this point in time, but what we do know is that it's very, very high. He also has one of those elite NFL arms. He can get a lot of air underneath that football and pass it downfield quite a ways. But I don't think the situation is nearly as good at this point in time in LA as it is with the skill players that you've got in Buffalo and the coaching you have in Kansas City, with very similar, respectively, when you compare those skill groups between Buffalo and Kansas City. I don't think the Chargers are quite on that level. I would say that Keenan Allen is one of the more underrated wide receivers in the game. He's fantastic at separating, but he doesn't give you nearly the same downfield upside that a Tyreek Hill or a Stephon Diggs gives you. Obviously, the tight end situation in Los Angeles is a lot worse in the passing game than it is in both Kansas City and Buffalo. And then when you talk about Mike Williams and the uncertainty around him and his status as the number 2 wide receiver with him hitting free agency, it's not what it all comes down to here, but it is things to think about. And obviously, throughout these players' careers, they're going to have a whole different cast of pass-catching options because they're going to, in terms of their NFL career, outlive the shelf lives of those catching passes from them right now. But obviously that is in the way, way future. But right now, again, Justin Herbert, we don't know exactly what he can be. This team just barely missed the playoffs, but they're still very competitive. And Justin Herbert, unlike these two players, is someone who opts not to run the football as much as the two names previous or prior to him on the list. So I get a lot of the elite stuff I like with the arm talent, the passing upside. And again, he does have a fantastic infrastructure that I believe is going to continually get better here with another free agency and draft class ahead of this team, which has been sort of in rebuild mode here since Phillip Rivers took off. And obviously now they're under a complete new regime and under the leadership of Justin Herbert, who I think is going to be a fantastic long-term dynasty asset. Kyler Murray is number 4 for me because I trust the 6'6" frame of Justin Herbert to be more durable, to be more widely available, and to be a consistent presence in my lineup. Something we've seen with Kyler Murray is that maybe his ceiling at this point in time is better than that of a Justin Herbert because of the value Murray can add on the ground. But 2 seasons in a row, we've started off white hot with Kyler Murray. MVP discussions, the Cardinals are off to the races, and then Kyler gets nicked about halfway through the year. He unwisely takes a shot that he shouldn't take. This year was against my Green Bay Packers. He rolled up on his ankle a little bit and ended up getting a bit injured and dinged up in that game. And he was never really quite the same after that. The Cardinals were undefeated heading into that matchup against my Packers. And from that point forward, the rest of the season, Kyler Murray and this offense were decidedly a lot less productive than they had been to that point in the year, which I believe coasting into that game, they were 7-0, maybe even 8-0 at that point in time. So you know you've got an elite upside to work with here with Kyler Murray. But when the rushing is such a big factor in him getting that ceiling, and the fact that he has been injured 2 seasons in a row, and we've seen the years play out very similarly in terms of the eventual outcome, that's something that's concerning for me. Also, his number 1 receiving threat, DeAndre Hopkins, is aging. He is across that 30 years of age marker, which is where I would expect to start to see some gradual physical decline. And D-Hop wasn't available for a lot of the back half of the season this year. You could argue that's a reason that Kyler Murray saw a decline in his production. But at this point, I think it's just safer to say that Justin Herbert, while his ceiling might not be quite as elite as Murray, I do believe it is still a ceiling that is elite. He's someone that I think is more dependable and someone who I think has a higher long-term floor and, again, has a longer shelf life as an elite quarterback in the National Football League than that of a Kyler Murray, who right now looks like he's going through a little bit of beef with the Cardinals. He wants a contract, and I guess deservingly so when you've got those injuries to end the last 2 seasons. You don't want to risk anything heading into year 4 and deal with the 5th-year option and have the whole Baker Mayfield situation when I think Kyler is a much better player. And that's part of the reason he's up here at number 4. So he should get his money. Hopefully that's all resolved and we don't have some sort of franchise quarterback controversy, or not a controversy, but drama this offseason. At number 5, I got to put Joe Burrow, who's surging up the list here. Obviously, with this extended postseason run, the success we're seeing him have, the infrastructure of talent he has around him to work with, and very young talent, I might add, talent that isn't necessarily already in their prime or on the back slope of their prime, but players who I would argue maybe have not even reached their prime yet, with the exception of a CJ Uzoma or a Tyler Boyd, who are not the two biggest factors in this offense, because that would be Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And now Joe Burrow at number 5 here. This could be a bit optimistic. We haven't necessarily seen Joe Burrow have an elite. It is only year 2. We will note that here. We haven't seen him have an elite fantasy football ceiling or season rather, because he isn't someone that runs. He is almost strictly a pocket passer. He does not want to. He can. He's athletic. He can scramble. He can get outside the pocket and make throws. But he's not necessarily a Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes type where they are inclined almost to step up in the pocket and rush for additional yards when the edge rush gets a bit too wide or when the play breaks down. Joe's done that a few times in the playoffs, but that's not his game. He is looking to keep his eyes downfield and hit the T. Higgins and Jamar Chases of the world for big hitters and make big plays. And he's very, very poised while doing it. I would love to see the interceptions come down a little bit from where they were at this season. Some of them were rather fluky. He did have some multi-interception games where they weren't always the prettiest looking, but clearly he has taken steps forward here. He's led his team to a Super Bowl, a team that drafted number 1 overall just 2 seasons ago. So he has totally flipped the script in the expectation level for the Cincinnati Bengals. And hand in hand with that, the durability, the body of work I expect to have going forward here, the talent that he has and possesses. He's been compared to Tom Brady almost so much that it's been nauseating the last 2 weeks. Not because I'm so much of a Brady fan that I couldn't possibly bear to have someone else compared to him, but it's like everyone's take right now is that Joe Burrow is the next Tom Brady, so you just get sick of hearing it. But nonetheless, I see the similarities. I see the comparisons, and I see the swagger that Joe Burrow leads his football team with, and ultimately the upside he possesses as a long-term, young dynasty asset that could potentially be one of the staples of your team for the very, very far and distant foreseeable future, or not foreseeable even, future here. Lamar Jackson at number 6 is someone who has slipped down my list a little bit here because this is the first season we've really seen him start to take missed time as a result of his play style. And it wasn't on a rushing attempt that Lamar Jackson was injured, but it was on a scramble outside of the pocket. It was a play that he was trying to improvise a little bit, and he ended up rolling up his ankle and having a bone bruise, which ultimately cost him the final 4 games of his season. Lamar Jackson is a very young quarterback, but unlike Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson does not throw the same football that those players do. And yes, Lamar Jackson does something that those other players don't necessarily do to the elite extent that he does, and that is run the football and give you fantasy value on the ground. Lamar Jackson has been extremely turnover happy this season in terms of, I went and looked at all of his seasons prior to this point in time, and he actually had his worst year in terms of touchdown passes and touchdown passes per game, which I think is something that is very important. But again, 13 interceptions this year. He made some throws that were really exciting, really exceptional, some deep shots to Hollywood Brown that really made you start believing in him as a passer and seeing the improvements and strides forward he's made at that position. But then he made some other ones that were a little bit boneheaded that looked, or the play would be over and you would kind of wonder, why did you just throw that football? Especially that one, the first matchup between the Ravens and the Browns. That one was extra ugly with the interceptions Lamar was throwing. So you still got yourself an elite opportunity as a rusher. But again, with this play style does come injuries. That was kind of the concern I had with Kyler Murray. It's more of an elite short-term asset and less so a long-term play, because Lamar, like Michael Vick had to do in his NFL career, is going to have to take significant strides forward as a passer. And I will say Lamar Jackson, to give him credit, has done so. He has improved as a passer. He is a better passer today than he was when he walked into the National Football League, even in his MVP season. I believe this year he showed flashes of being a better passer than he was in those seasons. However, where's the balance? Because we all know that as the rushing attempts and the rushing value deteriorates, he's going to have to significantly improve as a passing asset to compensate for those lost fantasy points, because you rack up those rushing yards and those rushing points a lot faster than you do when you're throwing the football. So again, Lamar Jackson, as the physical attributes deteriorate, and that's something that we see almost regress at a faster rate, obviously, than these quarterbacks who can rely on their arms for the next 10 to 15 years. That is something that has to factor into the overall perspective of how we view him. Dak Prescott at number 7 here is kind of the marker of, I think Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow might be in their own little middling tier there. If you want to put Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen in their own tier together, I think that's something you could do. And then maybe a Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray tier, maybe breaking things up a little bit too much. But I think Dak Prescott is kind of the start of the next tier here, where I don't think of these players so much so as elite dynasty options. I think that they have some very strong strengths, some very great ceilings, but the floors can start to get really ugly in individual performances for these players, and there are easy to point out flaws about these players that give you second thoughts when assessing their fantasy value. The first is that Dak Prescott, albeit he's in an offense with a lot of skilled players, with a lot of players who make him look better than he is at times, like a CeeDee Lamb and Ezekiel Elliott previously, before obviously his regression, Amari Cooper, guys that can help him as an elite supporting cast, elevate him to his maximum potential. Dak Prescott is not a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen throwing the football. He's not a Justin Herbert. He's someone who I would say is a slightly above average passer. He doesn't necessarily tuck the football and run and have an elite rushing staple and presence in his fantasy game, but he's someone in a very offensive-minded football team that did, I understand, take a swing back here in 2021 to being a bit more balanced. The defense was a playmaking unit. They did give the Cowboys a lot more opportunities on offense. But the issue I have, the biggest one with the Dallas Cowboys, is consistency. And under Mike McCarthy, that has been a major issue, something that we frequently go back to time and time again, whether it's the receivers just not constantly and consistently being able to get the football in the hands of your best playmakers. They have to find a happy balance and a happy medium between running the football and throwing the football, because I feel that at times, against teams not in the NFC East, the Dallas Cowboys will either get completely shut down and stifled by an opposing defense of a respectable team because all they do is pass, they become one-dimensional, and they have no success in that phase of the game. In other games, we see them pull back, and almost the coaching staff blames Dak Prescott, and that's not, I'm not putting words in their mouth per se, but they'll do the exact opposite. They'll overrun the football. There'll be no explosive element to that offense. If the rushing attack is stymied, then you have nowhere to go from there, and that's where you start to get some of these lower floor performances and kind of the reasoning as to why I don't see Dak Prescott as someone who is an elite long-term quarterback and someone who is going to give you these dominant fantasy numbers. On paper, he has the weapons around him. We saw in the 2020 season, prior to him having that really bad ankle injury, Dak was someone that was putting up elite numbers because in those first few games, he was passing the ball all over the yard. They were, again, one-dimensional and playing some very bad defenses. But I don't see that being a sustainable element here in his situation going forward long-term. Not that it's a huge deal, because I think Dak Prescott can keep playing for another 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons, but he is approaching age 30, again, without the element of an elite rushing force in his fantasy profile, though. That age is not necessarily something that worries me, because I don't think the physical attributes play an overly large factor into his fantasy situation here. You'll see him get the occasional QB sneak on the goal line or make an occasional third down play on a read option, but Dak's not someone I worry about long-term, again, with his legs. Russell Wilson down here at number 8. We're starting to get to a quarterback who in the very recent past was thought of as an elite dynasty option, as an elite NFL quarterback. But this down season, I think, has put a lot of harsh criticism directed in Russell Wilson's way. And I think, again, at times that might be rather harsh, but I think that as his age continues to increase, with there being many more youthful options with great situations and long-term futures in front of them, we got to move Russell Wilson down the board a little bit. He is still tied to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Those are two fantastic options to have, throwing the football to downfield when you are that being Russell Wilson, one of the best deep ball passing quarterbacks in the National Football League. That's a huge asset to have. However, we do have some question marks with Russell Wilson. Who knows if he'll be playing for Seattle next year? I would bet that would be the case. However, you never know. If his dissatisfaction with the organization continues to press forward and there's more issues with that team, you never know what could be in store here in this long offseason period. So, again, I'm just going to assume he remains a Seahawk for next year and has those two boundary options. He'll also be getting Dwayne Eskridge, a really nice deep ball receiver or deep route pattern running wideout from last year's NFL draft class. He had some injuries this year. I'd love to see him incorporated into the offense more. Hopefully they can find that balance that I kind of just complained about with Dak Prescott. The Seahawks had struggles running the football for the majority of this year, and if they can get a more balanced attack going forward in the future, that could be another huge asset to this team. So Russell Wilson, though, he'll turn 34 during next season. The shelf life is just not super long when you look at it and frame it in comparison to other players on this list. And as a guy who doesn't necessarily run around and scramble for yardage and fantasy points, it's not something overly worrying, but Russell Wilson does rely on that scrambling to get him outside the pocket. And kind of like we talked about with Joe Burrow, very different skill sets and very different context. But Burrow is also someone who's not necessarily going to run the ball that much. Russ is not going to tuck it and run either. He's looking to hit that deep moon ball downfield and get some chunk yardage in that fashion. At number 9, I've got Matthew Stafford here, coming off of, in just a few days here, his first season with the Los Angeles Rams. We'll see who wins that Bengals-Rams Super Bowl matchup. Just a little tidbit here for those of you watching this prior to that game. I think I'll take the Rams, but if I'm going to bet the spread, I'll probably bet the Bengals and the points. But straight up, I'd probably take the Rams to win this game. Regardless, though, we're here to talk about Matt Stafford in Dynasty Fantasy Football. I think that Matt Stafford has a very comparable situation to that of Russell Wilson. You've got a quarterback who just turned 34 years of age here in Super Bowl week, and you've got the fantastic arm talent. You've got the upside to hit deep shots, and you've got the supporting cast to help him facilitate those elite numbers. But again, the ceiling and the longevity you're getting here with Matthew Stafford, that's the key here for some of these guys who are currently thought of as quarterbacks at the top of the NFL game right now, but just don't have all that much in front of them in comparison to the quarterbacks of tomorrow, if that makes any sense, who are still the quarterbacks of today: Herbert, Allen, Mahomes, Murray, Burrow, all of these guys. But these players just have a much shorter shelf life. I would argue that for, honestly, each of the top 6 to 7 quarterbacks on this list, they might have twice as much time playing the game of football left in front of them than a Matthew Stafford does down here. So he'll have Cooper Kupp next season. Robert Woods hopefully returning off of ACL surgery. Unless the Rams were to some reason cut him, it would save them $10 million in cap space, but I wouldn't expect them to make that move because I think he's a really integral part of this team. They will have Van Jefferson, Tutu Atwell, who we haven't seen yet this year, will be back. And then obviously the big one that's an unknown is Odell Beckham Jr. and his status obviously being a free agent. So Stafford, someone I like here in the short term, but not as much long-term upside. But Trevor Lawrence here, this is where it kind of marks the next tier of quarterbacks down, if again we are going to do that. Trevor Lawrence for me is someone that has the elite potential. He's just a baby here in the National Football League. He has a lot of time to refine this game and to get better as a player. But again, we haven't seen that. We haven't seen Trevor Lawrence produce at an elite level in fantasy football, and we haven't seen him give us a return on investment, at least for those of us that drafted him in Dynasty Startup or Dynasty Rookie Drafts last April or May or whenever you ended up doing those rookie drafts. Trevor Lawrence, again, though, is someone who we cannot forget. It seems like he was almost left by the wayside with how bad the Jags and how forgettable they were this past year. And honestly, I feel like we talked more about the Urban Meyer drama than we did about Trevor Lawrence and his fantasy value. But I think that Doug Peterson was a coaching hire that could potentially save him. And save him quite literally, yes, because I think this Jags organization is such a toxic structure that had they not made the right coaching hire, I think that they could have ruined him potentially. But Trevor Lawrence, just 12 months ago, was someone pre-draft we were talking about as the best college prospect at the quarterback position to come out since Andrew Luck. And that does not come lightly. That doesn't come with a grain of salt. That's something that was truly meant by a lot of people, or at least I hope it was, and wasn't just being tossed out there, because you see everything with him. You see the arm talent. You see the improvisational ability inside and outside the pocket to make big-time throws. He's a winner, won a national championship at Clemson. We've been talking about him since his freshman year in college, and that's where the upside comes into play here. Again, this structure and the pieces around him need to get better. The offensive line needs improvement. You could maybe go and get him a true number one receiver. You've got a couple nice 2s and 3s right now with Laviska Shenault, Marvin Jones, an aging veteran, still a dependable guy for the quarterback position. Anywhere he's went throughout his career, he's been very dependable. And then DJ Chark coming back off of, I believe, his ankle surgery earlier on this season, or really early on this season. Those are all nice pieces, but they truly need a X receiver, a number one build for Trevor Lawrence to throw the football to. They went out and got Dan Arnold to help him out a little bit via trade this past season, but again, this is a situation that's evolving. It's improving, or hopefully improving, and should be better for Lawrence this year. I think he'll be able to take those year 2 and year 3 jumps now that he does have a Super Bowl winning head coach, someone that has played a large hand in the development of a player like a Carson Wentz. And going forward, I think that's a lot of opportunity for a Trevor Lawrence to be a dynasty asset for us with those tools he has. Trey Lance is my number 11 quarterback right now. I think if you ask some, they would have Trey Lance ranked ahead of Trevor Lawrence. But for me, simply what it comes down to is when evaluating the players, yes, maybe Trey Lance has a higher ceiling than Trevor Lawrence. However, Trevor Lawrence has a lot more skills right now and has a lot more capabilities of being a refined NFL quarterback today, and I would argue as soon as next season, maybe throughout the entirety of next season, than Trey Lance has right now. With Trey Lance, a lot of this is prospective optimism. And not to be the party pooper here with Trey Lance, because I think he could be a fantastic, maybe even someday an elite NFL quarterback. I love the skill set and tools he brings to the table. I love the comps that I had for him during the draft process. I think it could be awesome. I absolutely see the upside and the optimism that so many in the dynasty community have with Trey Lance. I just think that in terms of when comparing him to Trevor Lawrence, we got to pump the brakes a little bit. Yes, I am a huge believer in situation, in what is the ecosystem surrounding you when you land at a spot. But Trevor Lawrence, I think, got such a big break when Doug Peterson was hired to the Jags. I think that we can almost level the playing field there a little bit, even though Trey Lance today has much better weapons with Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle, and obviously a dominant run game than Lawrence has right now. But I do think that his skills need major refinement. He didn't have an overt dominance in the running game in terms of using his legs as a fantasy asset as a rookie. Now, he was used sparingly. He had a little injury. I believe it was to his throwing hand during the season. And then he just wasn't used down the stretch for this team. But he is someone, again, who I do think has a massive ceiling. But his release needs a little bit of work to me. His delivery could use some improvement. I think that there's just a lot of raw traits and talent that needs to be refined and coached up here. He needs every rep throughout camp and OTAs and everything. Trey Lance needs to be the guy for San Francisco going forward. It's his time. I'm excited for him, but I am going to put him below Trevor Lawrence today, as we haven't seen Trey Lance obviously realize the potential he has to be a successful player. And then last up here is Jalen Hurts. And simply put here, Jalen Hurts is an elite fantasy asset in the short term because of his rushing ability, because of what we saw this Eagles offense do, be the number one rushing attack in the National Football League in the 2021 season. However, Jalen Hurts has a lot less commitment tied to him long term in relationship and in comparison to everyone else on the list today, because he has the least amount of draft capital invested into him by the Philadelphia Eagles, of everyone on this list, with the exception of Russell Wilson and Dak Prescott, who are made men. They have gotten onto second, and I believe for Russ, maybe even a third contract here, are making tons of money and are committed to long-term by their franchises as the franchise quarterback. Jalen Hurts is entering into year 3 now. He got the Eagles to a playoff berth in year 2, so he's showing improvement. And according to the Eagles head coach, Nick Sirianni, they are committing to him for next season. But at this point, we know words are just words. If the Eagles fall in love with someone in the pre-draft process and with one of the 3 first-round picks, or if they have the guts to trade up for someone because they like them that much in this draft class, the Eagles have the assets to do so. So at this point, words are arbitrary and don't really mean much to the situation. So we could see Jalen Hurts be replaced tomorrow. That's, again, why in the short term he is an elite option at the fantasy quarterback position. But again, the key word there being short term. I think this offense can be fantastic if used properly, but I did see horribly obvious flaws with Jalen Hurts' game in that playoff game against Tampa Bay. When playing against formidable competition, it was not hard to see that Jalen Hurts does not have elite arm strength, some of the passes, or at least he doesn't have elite confidence in himself to deliver the ball to the right spot. He was throwing loft passes in situations where he needed to just rip it into a tight window, and his receivers, Devontae Smith being the case a lot of times, or Dallas Goedert being open and separating from the Tampa Bay secondary, Hurts just was not delivering accurate passes and was not hitting his targets on time and, again, on target. So Hurts needs to improve that arm strength, and either if it is an arm strength issue, which he doesn't have the biggest arm, obviously, of anyone in the NFL, and clearly he is not an elite NFL arm talent, but he's either got to get his confidence up in himself to deliver that ball quicker and on time, or he's got to figure something out here, because the rushing value, as we talked about with Lamar Jackson, is something that expires very quickly in terms of a player's physicality level and peak of their prime from a physical standpoint. Lamar Jackson is doing the work and showing the improvement he needs to as a passer to give us hope for the long term. Let's just hope that Jalen Hurts can do the same. All right, those are my top 12 Dynasty quarterbacks here for 2022 fantasy football. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you've got any questions for me, be sure to drop those down as well. Go check out the channel. Again, click that subscribe button if you're new around here. And go check out my Dynasty fantasy football playlist for 2022 that can be found on my channel. And check out all of our videos we've posted to this point in the season. Also, again, don't be afraid. Go join that SFS community Discord server and get involved, ask me questions, and all that great stuff. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Peace out.